who came. We're going to stop 3 minutes early, and I'm going to introduce Menachem Kaiser, who wrote this book, which is called Plunder. And Menachem is an extraordinary writer and a funny person. And it's a funny book, but it's also a very thoughtful book. It's about his experiences. This is bizarre sometimes, and yet also surprising experiences as a searching for his family's um, uh, uh, property that was taken during World War II. And in doing so, he uncovers just some bizarre situations in Poland, and he gets involved with some really interesting people, and he discovers stuff about um, his family. He discovers some stuff about himself, and he discovers some stuff about this genre of people writing books about going back to Eastern Europe and reclaiming their property. So this is sorry, this is Menachem Kaiser, and it's Plunder. I can't see myself. Let me go back to it. And it's right there. You go, Menachem Kaiser and Plunder. Okay, so I'm going to just pass it along. Menachem's agreed to read to you a little bit, and then I will interview him a wee bit. So I now have to find you under the M's, and here goes. Add spotlight, and gonna unmute you. I'm gonna actually make you a co-host so you can share your screen. And Menachem, be sure to tell your story about your mom. Okay, you got to unmute yourself. Unmute yourself.
Hi, everyone. Thanks. Good to see you, David. It's so fun to watch these classes and have songs and lessons go on. It's much more pleasant than what's usually happening on my computer. What David's referring to with my mother is it's been a weird week. Basically, I've been doing a lot of Zoom book talks, and on Sunday night, my mother came on and wrote, instead of a question in the chat, and there was about 150 people there, she wrote, I don't have a question, but I do have an answer to the question you guys are all wondering. Yes, he is single. And I tweeted that. I had never really tweeted before. And it's gone viral in a way that was strange. Even this morning, it was picked up by the British tabloids. So it's now in like the Evening Standard and the Independent. It's now on like Yahoo News. It's yeah. So I've been working really hard to get publicity, and it turns out you just need your mother to humiliate you, and you have to be there to record it. That is the secret. So my book is called Plunder, a memoir of family property and Nazi treasure. As David said, it's sort of the core of the book is about my reclamation of ancestral property in a town called Sosnowiec, which is a town about 70 kilometers outside Krakow. My grandparents were Holocaust survivors, and my grandfather, who I'm named after, actually, I didn't really know this growing up, but after the war, for about 30 years, he had tried to get back the building. And then I discovered this really in 2015. I was very moved. And so I decided to take up his cause. And then the other narrative in the book is it's a little bit of a long story, and we're a little short on time today. But basically, I discovered a relative I didn't know I had. And this guy turned out to be, on account of a secret diary he had written while as a slave laborer working on underground Nazi tunnels. He kept this diary, and this diary has become like a mythological, almost sacred text among treasure hunters. And so this guy was my grandfather's first cousin. We never knew that anyone in the family had survived. And on account of that, I became a celebrity among these Polish treasure hunters, and they sort of embraced me. And so I spent quite a bit of time with them. So the book follows these two threads. And beyond that is sort of also like a meditation on the nature of like history and memory and genre, and like how we sort of tell our own stories. And so at David's request, I'm going to read, I'm going to read the opening, actually. which is I haven't actually done before, so it will be a nice opportunity. Okay, so this is from Plunder, my book. My father's father, Meyer Menachem Kaiser, died in April 1977. This was 8 years before I was born. I didn't know him. We had had no grandfather grandson moments. I'd never given him a hug. He'd never given me gifts my parents weren't thrilled about. He'd never scolded me for running into the street or told me he loved me. To me, he was the father my father had once had, and that's it. I knew astonishingly little about him, much less than could be attributed to our lives' lack of overlap. What did I know? I knew the pit stops in the obituary. I knew he was born in Poland, but not which city. I knew that he survived the war, but not a single detail beyond that. And I knew that after the war, he moved to Germany, where in 1946 he married Bertha Ramraz and had one child, my uncle. Then to New York, where my father and my aunt were born. Then to Toronto, where he died at 56 of heart failure. Whatever slim conception I had of my grandfather came from what my father told me, usually on the anniversary of my grandfather's death, the yahrzeit. On that day, my father and I had a routine, same every year, fixed, ritualized. Just before sunrise, my father wakes me up and we go to shul, where he leads the services and says the Kaddish. Afterwards, he brings out a couple of bottles of schnapps, a bag of pastries, a bag of crackers. The dozen or so men gather around, have a shot, have some pastry, and say to my father, May's neshama have an aliyah. They say this in the manner one offers holiday greetings, formally, perfunctorily, but not unkindly. My father replies, Amen, thank you. After shul, he and I drive to the cemetery. It is exceptionally well maintained, laid out according to synagogue affiliation, and neighborhood like, with soft demarcations and ordered avenues. Beth Emeth, Minsker, Stopnitzer, Anshe Minsk. Modest even in the afterlife, the men and the women are buried separately. So that will be the short opening of the book. And David, David is a master interviewer, except right now he's on mute.
I guess I'm not on mute. I like what you said about modest even in the afterlife. Menachem has a real talent with wordcraft that it's doesn't call attention to itself like, hey, look at me, I'm a good writer, but he is, and you end up noticing that it really hooks you with his story, but also with the way he puts sentences together. Um, I actually listened to it, so if you're wondering, you don't want to read it. He's also a good actor because he did the actual reading. They sometimes get, it's often the same person who ends up
That's
reading.
high. Yeah,
Like,
I was really reluctant actually to do the audiobook.
but Morgan Freeman wasn't available. Right. It's often the same person. No, so uh, let's just start with the most bizarre stuff that you're. Well, tell us about the treasure hunters. Who are these people, and
Sure.
what? Because it's so crazy, tell us about the things that they believe.
Yeah. So basically, it's a subculture, but it's a very, very large subculture. So treasure hunters is a little bit of a misnomer. That's where it gets translated, but I would say it's the large community of mostly men, but definitely not entirely men, who are interested in sort of, let's call it like hands-on history. So they're in sort of all sorts of like they love exploring, whether it's like abandoned homes or it's Nazi infrastructure or even stretching back to World War I. But it definitely includes people looking for objects, so treasure. So you have a small handful of, I would say, profiteers who are actually trading illegally and illegally smuggling World War I and World War II artifacts. And the number, I'd say if you sort of include everyone, so on one side of the spectrum, you have like the hobbyists who go out with metal detectors. And the other side, you have extremely sophisticated exploration groups using advanced equipment. And sometimes these are even sponsored by larger companies. It easily is more than 100,000 people. So it's a very significant subculture. Um, and they're after everything, but especially things that are underground. And so so I would call it this culture of mystery. And mystery is their term, not mine. But the culture of mystery is something called Project Riza. And Riza is a series of 7 underground complexes built by the Nazis using mostly Jewish slave labor towards the end of the war. None of them were completed, and some of them were closer to completion. And the ones that are closer to completion are enormous. We're talking square kilometers of footage, ceilings that are 20 meters tall. They're basically like underground neighborhoods. Um, and what's truly bizarre and enigmatic about these tunnels is that there's virtually no primary documentation. So that we had no German documentary evidence as to what the Germans were planning to use for it. And so I will actually, because we're on Zoom, can I share a screen, David?
Please do.
So I'm going to show you some of these photos of me when I went inside the tunnels. So this is one of the smaller ones that's called Complex Sabone. It's not open to the public. You basically have to know the GPS coordinates. This was the first time I was in it, so I went with a couple of treasure hunters who just took me in their Jeep up an unmarked road on the side of a mountain, and we went in like a tiny hole, which was just like the size of a manhole, just on the side. I wouldn't have been able to see it had I not been with them. So again, this is another photo of also Complex of Bone. 3, or actually now 4 of them are open to the public and are operated kind of like a national park. So they show you the things, and these are huge. And so this one is from Osufka. So you could see about 10% of it has the reinforced concrete. So you could start getting a sense of what it was supposed to look like. This is and so you could see here the rail, like the rail, whatever the tracks, which was used to cart out the rubble. And so basically what they did in terms of design and engineering, they would put one tunnel. There are 2 different tunnels on 2 different stories, and then they would collapse the center and sort of make a much bigger hole. So like you could see sort of the finished product here to give you a sense, or 25 meters tall. So like truly enormous. This is one of the larger caverns in the Sufka. It's hard to see how big it is in this photo, but that far wall is.
Menachem,
Yeah.
You're Canadian.
Yeah.
Not everybody here is. When you can use meters or feet,
good catch. Basically, for all, so like I would say that those ceilings would be like 60 to 70 feet tall. In this room, it's about 150 meters, so you're like long from which is like 450 to 500 feet. So like truly enormous structures. And then let me get out of this and bring back my face. Oh, could you guys hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, it's freezing on me for some reason. Okay, but if you guys could hear me, I'll keep going.
Please do.
Yeah, it's so, oh God, it's, I'm gonna be back in 30 seconds. It's crashing on me.
Okay. So I will tell a little story about Menachem while we're waiting, which is Menachem, because this is related. Menachem heard that there was in Nachlaot, which is the neighborhood of Jerusalem where I live, that there was a child sex ring where they would, a pedophile ring. And he went to Israel to research it. And once he got there, he realized that it didn't exist. And that not only didn't exist, that no pedophile ring has ever existed in history. And he just chased that story and wrote an excellent story about it in Tablet. And one of the things that I'm going to ask Menachem when he comes back is to what degree he just starts to write about things and he notices that it goes in another direction. I don't know that that's something that a lot of people do. Can you hear me, Menachem? Oh, maybe he left altogether. I don't know that that's something. I think that's something that a great writer might um, be able to do. But that let me spotlight myself because all I see is Stu. Um, I don't see me. So more. I don't know where I am. Hey, mom, can you see me?
I can see you, and
Okay.
Menachem said in the chat that he's here.
Okay. Menachem is back.
Unmute him.
Okay. Oh, unmute him. Oh, I have to make him a co-host again because he left. So here we go. Make co-host. Hi, Menachem. Oh, hi, Menachem.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, it crashed on me. Yeah, could I? Am I heard, David?
Yeah. Did you hear what I told them while you were gone?
No.
I told them about your experience showing up in Nachlaot, thinking you were writing one story, and then starting to ask some questions and discovering that the real news, the real story was something completely different. And I think that's what happened here too.
Yeah, well, kind of. I sort of the way I got connected with the treasure hunters was I read about them in 2015 when two of these guys announced to the world that they had discovered the golden train. And the golden train is this very sort of long-standing legend in the region, that there was a train towards the end of the war that the Nazis filled with looted gold, put it on a train for Berlin. It got diverted and it was hidden inside of a mountain in sort of this network of tunnels. And yeah, two guys in 2015 claimed to have discovered it. And so it made sort of major international news, like the BBC, the New York Times, Fox, Sky. Everyone kind of descended on the small town of Wabjach because they said they found the golden train. And so I read about it. I was like, this is wild. And I really just sort of got in touch with them because I was interested in maybe incorporating it into a novel. And I really just lucked out. I contacted a guide who was sort of the cited authority in all of these articles and said, hey, would you take me for a couple of days and show me, introduce me to people and show me the tunnels? And she said, sure. And then once I started hanging out with them, we were just hanging out one day after the showing me some of these tunnels, and I kept hearing my last name. And I don't speak Polish, so I was hearing my last name inside of the Polish. And if they didn't know my last name, so they weren't referring to me. And I eventually stopped them and said, what's up? Why, who are you guys? And they explained that they were talking about Abraham Kaiser. And Abraham Kaiser turned out to be my grandfather's closest surviving relative. And he was that prisoner I mentioned who had kept a diary. And because there's no primary documentation, that diary has become a kind of sacred text among the community. And I was embraced by the community as Abraham Kaiser's kin. They all sort of went with the story that I was his grandson. Didn't really matter how many times I corrected them. And so, yeah, like you said, David, like I went because I thought it was cool. That's really why I got in touch with them. And then eventually it turned into a much deeper and stranger and like more personal story than I ever could have expected.
So they forget or they don't pay attention to the slave labor that created many of these things. They're not thinking at many points, oh, this is something that the Jews did. It's just an adventure they're on. Am I wrong about that?
I don't. It's tough. Maybe it's not their primary narrative, but they're not unaware. So you can't be unaware. It's impossible. So they like might see these places as like sort of exciting. They're not Nazi sympathizers at all. They're very anti-Nazi. Like they seem that they're almost all of them I met, I would say 99% are Polish, very nationalist, very proud, and see Nazi Germany as an aggressor. So they're aware of it. The question is like what gets emphasized, I'd say. And so no, the Jewish stuff doesn't always get emphasized and sometimes could feel a little not necessarily trivialized, but sometimes even like approaching kitsch.
Okay.
The way they talk about it. And so but I will say I did meet a number of these treasure hunters who have Jewish grandparents.
Oh.
And so they didn't see themselves as Jewish, interestingly, but they absolutely saw themselves as having Jewish legacy.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, for those particular people, it was like a much more nuanced approach.
Now, you touched on this. This is fascinating, these tunnels, and they may have been really important. We don't know, but they're massive, right? We don't know what the Nazis were planning with them. But, I focused on the history of the Holocaust when I got my master's degree in Jewish history. I never heard of anything like this, any hint that this thing might have existed. Why don't we know about this? Is it just because nobody wrote it down? I mean, what?
I mean, I think if you're like in the world of sober history, look, same thing happened to me. I didn't hear. I was spending like I did a Fulbright in Lithuania in 2010. Spent years researching the Vilna Ghetto. Spent at least I spent a tremendous amount of time in Poland up until that point, researching Holocaust related subjects. I never heard of this either, and so until the Golden Train thing happened. So I think, look, if you open up like the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum Encyclopedia, it's in there.
Okay.
Like it's not, but I think if you're like a sober historian, these things aren't that special. Like it's sort of an unfinished Nazi infrastructure project. That's it.
Okay, well, let's talk about what's not sober about it, which is some of the
Right.
ideas that these people had.
So
So maybe start with the ones that are a little bit not sober and go all the way to the ones that are
So
nuts.
what's David's referring to? So basically, is because there's a real lack of documentation, there's a kind of a void. And whenever you have voids, especially with, let's call it, to be generous, enthusiastic people, they're going to come up with some pretty zany solutions to that void. And well, let's call it what they are: conspiracy theorists. And so I didn't really understand that coming in, but it's really started to build first pretty slowly and then like more and more and more. So the first sort of weird stuff I heard, like the sort of like the more modestly weird theories, were stuff like, oh, this is was going to be, or in fact was, an underground nuclear factory. And I was like, that seems unlikely. Or then they're like, it was an R&D department for some of the for the Wunderwaffe, which was the Nazis, which is an actual thing, which was the Nazis' secret super weapons department, where they were trying to sort of like make they did like very, very long range guns and things like that, and some very advanced tanks and other machinery. But it was a real department that was devoted to like moonshot
Mhm.
kind of weapons. And then it got a lot weirder when people started talking to me about anti-gravity and flying UFOs and like Nazi flying saucers. And then it became even weirder, and people started talking about time travel. So like the Nazis building a time machine or actually having a time machine. And then it got even weirder. People were like, oh, there was Nazi alien alliances. And so it's sort of like an occultism that the Nazis were actually somehow in communication with past civilizations. So I'll show you actually one photo. Um, so this thing is. I'm not even going to say what it is. I'm going to show you guys. Um,
Well, while you're waiting, I want everybody to know that the very next thing we're going to do is let people ask questions. However, this is going on YouTube, so if anybody has a question, warning,
so
your face is going to be on YouTube.
so this
Go ahead,
thing.
Malcolm.
So everyone can see this thing.
Yeah.
So the way this is it says Vodash underneath, and that is a so-called technical military museum that's run by a very strange man. And so the museum claims that thing is enormous. That thing is like 150 feet tall. Like it is much bigger than it looks. And so the museum claims that is a rig for UFOs, where they tested a landing and testing rig for Hanabu 3, which was a flying saucer built by the Nazis, and the museum claims that it was operational, and it was built on anti-gravity technology. And so I'm not even going to tell you what it really was, but let's say it's a lot less of a fun answer.
Yeah.
And yeah, so I'd love to, if people have questions,
Yeah.
and you could ask whatever,
Yeah.
you know,
But
as
just so
far
you
afield
know,
as you want. Hmm?
Debbie already bought a copy of your book already, so you're doing good. Debbie announced that she's got it on her Kindle. So again, this is going on YouTube. So if you don't want your face online, don't ask a question, but you can raise your hand actually literally where you are, and I'm going to check to see what you look like, or you can raise your hand in the participants list, and Menachem will answer. So just go ahead and raise your hand. I'm in gallery room number 1, and I'm in gallery room number 2, and number 3. Anybody? Looking for hands. All right, well, I've got more, so Menachem has to leave in about 6 or 7 minutes, so let me,
Oh, I see a hand.
oh, yeah?
Susan Stregak.
Okay, let me just come down and unmute her. Where's the unmute button? There you go. Hi, Susan.
Hi. Hi. Thank you very much. This has been fascinating. My question is, I was part of a project where we photographed Holocaust survivors and interviewed them, and it was really a life-changing experience to meet all these people. And there's an exhibit that's been traveling as a result of this. And I'd like to know, Menachem, if you talk to survivors as part of this project.
Interesting. A little bit. And so basically there was it never formed an essential part, but I would say in the years leading up to this, I did a lot of work on the Vilna Ghetto. And in that project, I talked to quite a few survivors. In this project, a little bit, because I was trying to learn more about Sosnovich, which is the town my grandfather is from. And so I got connected with some people who had grown up there, including some people who are actually, I didn't really know this, who were related to me from my mother's side, which was like a funny coincidence. And so, yeah, but it wasn't the focus. My focus was not on connecting with survivors, but in terms of research, it certainly came up.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Menachem, if I was in charge of marketing this book, I would immediately market it in Poland as a sequel to your grandfather's book. Someone do that?
Yeah. Well, that book, that book is published in Poland. It's kind of it's very popular, but it's kind of niche. It's like a treasure hunter staple. But I am working now with talking to Polish publishers, and so I'm very committed. I'm gonna, the only thing that really matters to me in terms of foreign markets is getting it into Poland.
Into Poland. Saltzman from Omaha wants to know where your grandfather is buried and why are the men separated from the women in death?
My grandfather's buried in Toronto. So they moved after the war. They moved to Germany and then to New York, and then in the early '60s to Toronto, where he died. It's an Orthodox community, and we separate men and women all the time, and even the plot. It's like they're sort of separate sections. There's like the men's and the women's section of a burial society, which is usually synagogue affiliation.
Now, talk about the genre, because your book talks a lot about, your book is meta on many levels. Oh, that's redundant. But why don't you talk to us a little bit about how your book relates to the genre of searching for one's property?
Sure. So, I mean, it's a pretty, I wouldn't say necessarily popular, but it's not a new genre of particularly people my generation or maybe the generation above me, sort of rediscovering the roots, particularly in Eastern Europe, in a place maybe they've never been generally, or someplace their grandparents were born or their great grandparents were born. And so it was certainly a genre I was aware of. Between me and you 48 people, it's not a genre I like very much. I find it often to be very cloying and sentimental. And so I was sort of very anxious to move into the genre. And one of the things I really strive to do is sort of maintain a kind of honesty about sort of the distance that I had. Like I never knew my grandfather, and in the process of this book, I actually don't get closer to him. And it was important for me to sort of maintain that honesty about that, and really sort of to be very clear, to very clearly state my ignorance, both of my family and both of like the story I was getting into. And so as the book unfolds, things actually get more confusing, not less confusing. And there's nothing resembling catharsis here. And so like when I read these other books and they sort of have like a cathartic moment at the end, I really have a hard time relating. And so no, I
But
sort
you
of
have a moment at the end, Menachem. For those of you who are going to read it, there's an end. There's an
yeah,
amazing.
so there's an end and then there's an epilogue, and the epilogue, not to give any spoilers, definitely has a cliffhanger.
Yeah. Okay, so Menachem's going to have to go really soon, but I want to tell a quick story, which is that my mother, who you see, was talking to my brother, who you don't see, and said that she had some property from my grandmother from Eastern Europe. And my brother said, oh, I'm reading this book about somebody trying to recover property from Eastern Europe. And my mom said, well, which book? And it was Menachem's book that he happened to be reading. So this book is showing up all kinds of places. I hope you're gonna buy it. If anybody's gonna buy it or get it from the library or whatever, go ahead and tell us in the chat so that Menachem will
Well,
forget.
also, if anyone wants to get in touch with me about whatever, I posted an email address there. Feel free to reach out if you have particular questions or family stories or questions about what I did or book club, really anything at all. And I'd be very, very happy to talk with anybody.
Awesome. Well, Betsy's going to read it, and it's been awesome having you here. And I'm really happy that you participated. And we'll talk later.
Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody. And it's on Benson's list. Benson and Susan are going to get it too, and Saltzman is going to get it. And people are very happy that you joined us. And so you've probably already sold 5 for sure, and probably more than that. And I'm really glad that you came.
Wonderful.
Alan's reading it too. Bye.
Bye, guys.